Yeah, welcome to Israelite Inheritance, the most edifying show in the clouds. I'm Nazee Divine Emir O's Yasharal, Crown Prince of Israel. Me play no game. All right, I'm the keyboard warrior about to read some more of the edifying and educational lessons that we've been going over in this series. If you're just starting with us, I'm going to show you reading so far at this point. This is what we can. It's going to take about 4 or 5 shows to get through this package. This is the International Financial Institutions, a call for change. It was a report to the Committee on Foreign Relations, United States Senate, the 111th Congress, second session, in March 10, 2010. Okay, and as you can see here, you got the representative of the eagle, which represents the Edomite kingdom. Okay, so we can go into the symbology here, but we don't have to. Hopefully, I'm only talking to educated Israelite for symbology already. Okay, so yesterday we left off at page 25, page 19, the second paragraph. I'm going to start here. Today, 1 in Appendix 5 shows the U.S. contribution share and voting share for all MDB programs. MDB is multilateral uh, development banks. In most banks, countries get a few votes because they are members, regardless of the size of their capital subscription. Thus, for banks with a large number of small members, the voting share of large subscribers, such as United States, may be a little smaller than their share in providing the bank's resources. Voting shares are the same for both market-based and concessional loans in the ASDB and IDB. The American people must have confidence that our contributions to the international financial institutions will be managed effectively, efficiently, and transparently. Given our domestic budget and employment situation, it is all the more critical that we ensure that our contributions promote U.S. interests. More money for the development banks. That's a question. Should we give more money to the development banks? The international financial institutions, namely the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the Inter-American Development Bank are asking the United States and other donor countries for billions of dollars to be used for additional capital. The Obama administration has already agreed to the Asian Development Bank's proposal to request more than $500 million from Congress for a 200% capital increase. Negotiations continue on the request from the other development banks. From the United States alone, the Inter-American Development Bank is seeking $2.4 billion. The World Bank is seeking $1.1 billion. The African Development Bank is seeking $270 million. And the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Bank is seeking $150 million. Secretary Geithner indicated that the Treasury Department is currently reviewing requests for capital increases at a number of the MDBs and will move forward only on commitments where we are confident that they represent the best use of U.S. taxpayer funds within the context of our overall global development goals. For example, we need to be satisfied that each MDB is fully employing its available resources efficiently and effectively, and that each is committed to implementing needed reforms that will focus their missions and improve their effectiveness in accordance with the core principles, including an increased commitment to transparency, accountability, and good corporate governance. An increased capacity to innovate and achieve demonstrable results, and greater attention to the needs of the poorest populations. Since the fall of 2009, Treasury staff has regularly updated staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on their review of capital increase requests. As the requests for capital are negotiated with the international donor community, there is a window of opportunity for significant reform. Given the administration's signing statement that accompanied last year's supplemental appropriations bill, indicating that the administration may not pursue legislatively mandated reforms at the IMF, Congress may have an interest in securing the reforms before authorizing funds for the capital increases. Of serious concern is the speed at which the international community is moving forward with the capital increases. The G20 expects to finalize decisions on the capital commitments this spring. Before committing to providing additional funds to the multilateral development banks, the United States and the G20 must rethink the role of the international financial institutions that provide crisis support and assistance to developing countries and emerging markets. It also is imperative that our government examine the capital increases for each bank as a unique request. Each financial institution has distinct management challenges. For example, capital increases for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development must be accompanied by much more information concerning whether wealthy Russian business interests are benefiting the 41% of bank funds that flow to that country. Similarly, capital increases for the Inter-American Development Bank must address how that bank is reformed its practices after its unrealized loss of $1.9 billion in 2008 from its liquid portfolio of cash management instruments. The World Bank, for its part, has been a leader in addressing concerns about corruption and governance. Among other steps, it regularly publishes the names of contracting companies and individuals that have violated World Bank policy. The United States and other major donor countries have unwisely and unnecessarily linked the timing for general capital increase decisions to each individual bank's annual or spring meeting, beginning with the Inter-American Development Bank in March 2010, the World Bank in April 2010, and the African Development Bank and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in May 2010. This is an artificial deadline. The G20 communique links the general capital increases to one, a review of capital needs, given the four lending priorities articulated in the communique, and two, key institutional reforms. Rather than applying an arbitrary deadline, fulfillment of the G20 criteria should be the guide to timing. The development banks must not just commit to a reform agenda. Ideally, those reforms should be underway before donors pledge millions, if not billions, in funds. Many of the general capital increase requests were initiated on an emergency basis at the height of the global financial crisis under the direction of the G20 in early 2009. Now, private capital flows are returning to many developing markets, and varying levels of economic recovery are emerging in the region. by DBs. It is therefore appropriate to take a measured and thoughtful approach to general capital increase decisions that can take into account the real lending demands and longer term strategies of the relevant MDBs before permanently increasing their operations. See Table 9. Delay is particularly appropriate in cases where the current leadership of a bank is about to end its term and a new leader is to be chosen. See how they have leaders over their institutions and the banks. The whole banking system is basically a government. I mean, it is a government, and its own corporation, and all governments are corporations. So they choose leaders to put over themselves, and that's what our nation needs to do today. We need to set up elections for next year. The U.S. will want to make sure that the newly elected leadership is committed to a reform agenda. The granting of a new GCI should be a consequence, not a precondition, of new bank management accepting and beginning to implement the important changes sought by the U.S. and other donors. Gaining buy-in at the most senior level of the MDBs is essential to ensure that implementation of reforms takes place. With no clarity about who will be leading several of these MDBs moving forward, a commitment of substantial sums in capital immediately prior to elections will be an unnecessary leap of faith. The United States in arrears to the development banks. Over the years, Congress has not funded the administration's request to fulfill commitments made to the multilateral development banks during the course of international negotiations through which the United States has extracted numerous reforms. The arrears status of the United States has already reduced slightly the United States' share at the African Development Bank, for example, undermining the ability of the United States to leverage the development banks for our foreign policy interests. As noted by Secretary Geithner, the United States has over $1 billion in unmet commitments to the multilateral development banks. The bulk of the unmet commitments are to the concessional windows, which provide grants and subsidized loans to the poorest countries. Okay, so as we found out yesterday, the concessional windows, let me look for it. I wrote it down yesterday. Hopefully you got your pad and pen handy so you can write notes. Keep good notes. Okay. Let's see if I can find this here. Okay. Okay, one of them is called the International Development Association. That is a concessional window. And that is the only concessional window. International Development Association. So it's in various countries. Okay. Let's take a look here. Okay. Concessional windows. Okay. The large arrears weaken U.S. leadership at these institutions. Due to significant skepticism of the willingness of the United States to deliver on any initiatives that require significant funding. In particular, the United States pledges for debt relief through the development banks have not been fully funded by Congress. Because the United States has fallen far behind in fully funding for World Bank IDA replenishments, the United States will not be able to earn sufficient credits to meet current international debt relief commitments under the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative. Without full funding for arrears to the Inter-American Investment Corporation at the Inter-American Development Bank as scheduled, the United States will fail to clear out long-standing arrears and will permanently lose capital shares in the institution. Okay, so this is another reason you see that the United States is falling off, as you can see with the financial markets. But this is another reason why it's important to approach the African Development Bank, because uh, Israel is in Africa, and we own the land uh, from the Nile River east of the Nile River, north and south, to the Tigris and Euphrates River, north and south. So uh, that's going to be like considered, the majority of that is considered the African Development Bank. So that would probably have to include the Asian Development Bank, since Saudi Arabia is probably going to be considered an Asian nation. That's probably under their jurisdiction. I can look it up right fast. Let me see here. Asian Development Bank. Might be the best thing to do. Just check and see where their jurisdiction is. Asian Development Bank official site. Let's see if I can find what countries are like under their jurisdiction. Its original development bank established on August 22nd, 1966, which is headquartered in Metro Manila, Philippines. Okay, so yeah, that's definitely going to be one of the ones we approach, because the bulk of our fortune is found in the Philippines and China. So since uh, a lot of our resources are there, then and the banks have hijacked our fortune, and we're just going to be approaching these guys too. But I want to see if Saudi Arabia is part of their jurisdiction. Because I can't see Saudi Arabia being considered an African country. Norman Southeast Asia Department, countries before here, everything from Philippines to Saudi Arabia, Muslim countries, Catholic countries, etc. So I had been exposed. Let's see here. Administration Climate Change Commission. Let's see what we got here. What made you decide to join ADB, Asian Development Bank? Okay. Let's look up Saudi Arabia. Okay, what makes it interesting to work at ADB? I have had a lot of experience worked in something like 25 countries before coming here, everything from Philippines to Saudi Arabia, Muslim countries, Catholic countries. So I had been exposed to a wide range, and I think that is one of the interesting things about working at ADB. You not only get to know the Philippines and the culture by living in Manila and traveling around Manila, but also the countries that you're working in, getting to know them better, and seeing that in the staff who do come from all around the region, it makes for a good lunchtime because you have a lot of selections for different kinds of food. Okay, that was pretty idiotic, but I'm gonna have to assume that Saudi Arabia is part of their jurisdiction. I haven't confirmed that, so I'm just gonna have to assume it. Okay, where was I? ICC International Development permanently lose capital shares in the institution. Okay. Linkage between corruption and debt. World Bank economists Craig Burnside and David Dollar asserted in the American Economic Review that in the presence of poor policies, aid has no positive effect on growth. Similarly, the World Bank website identifies corruption as the single greatest obstacle to economic and social development. So, as we learned in this series, corruption means racism uh, of anyone who is an Israelite. And the Israelites know very well who they are, uh, except that they don't know uh, in detail who Israelites are worldwide. So the leaders of these places uh, specifically identify who they are and let that be known in their various countries. And they marginalize Israelites in every country on earth. Okay, so that extreme debt to us is about to be repaid soon. It is a bottomless pit. So that's why in one of the communications it shows that the wealth that is added up or estimated and, conserved and saved up for Israel is infinite dollars. So that is the bottomless pit that these people have dug for themselves by conquering everything that we have and being relentless and never giving up and never doing anything about it. So the Father is about to into place. Uh, they're gonna put them in that bottomless pit and seal them up to where they cannot get out of debt. Okay, so it's probably using quite a few Gentiles for that reason, because the Gentiles are the left hand side in the satanic realm. So the Father often uses Satan in order to exemplify and raise up himself by showing us who he is, and also by destroying them in various ways and lifting up his people who are Israel. Okay, so corruption associated with MDB loans not only squanders development funds and enriches dishonest officials and contractors, it leaves impoverished nations with the burden of the resulting debts. Corruption impedes development efforts in many ways. Bribes can influence important bank decisions on projects and contractors. Misuse of funds can inflate project costs, deny needed assistance to the poor, and cause rejections to fail. Stolen money may prop up dictators and finance human rights abuses. Moreover, when developing countries lose development bank funds through corruption, the taxpayers in those poor countries are still obligated to repay the development banks. When projects intended to boost economic development are derailed by corruption, the poor suffer and are cheated of projected benefits in quality healthcare, clean water, and education, Senator Lugar said. In 1999, the United States and other industrialized nations has established the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative in response to crippling levels of debt combined with anemic economic growth in dozens of developing countries. This was followed several years later by the more comprehensive Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative. The initiatives allowed poor countries with unsustainable debt levels to receive debt relief in exchange for adopting economic policy reforms. See, adopting economic policy reforms. That's what this package is that we're reading. This is a policy reform suggested to the World Bank, IMF, and the Swiss Bank, and the rest of the MDBs, the African Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Asian Development Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Okay, so once we establish ourselves as a nation and elect a leader through our elections, then we will be considered one of the poorest nations, and then we just implement the policy reforms laid out in this communication that I'm reading. Okay, so that automatically puts us on a status to where the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, these initiatives allowed poor countries with unsustainable debt levels to receive debt relief in exchange for adopting economic policy reforms and channeling their debt savings to poverty reduction activities. And Israel's mind is already primed and ready to serve in that capacity. That's how we think is given to the poor and raising up the, teaching people how to fish and things of that nature. However, countries that are managing their debts but had their development bank funds siphoned off by corrupt officials did not benefit from these rounds of debt relief. These debts remain. The most important way to combat the need for future debt relief is to ensure that development loans are implemented effectively and ethically. Monitoring and evaluations vary. Currently, the development banks vary in their evaluations processes and findings, and it is important that each project and program be evaluated. For example, the World Bank is developing outcome and output indicators. The Asian Development Bank has created operational effectiveness and efficiency indicators, and the Inter-American Development Bank is creating indicators covering the effectiveness of its priorities. They should share project and program effectiveness data throughout their banks and the other banks. Moreover, the findings, see how he said what they should do here? This is another suggestion of how we should run our treasury. Okay, so we're going to implement all these suggestions and filter them through the Bible to make sure that their suggestions match up with our thought process. Moreover, the findings from those evaluations must be incorporated in future programming. To paraphrase Professor David Levine of the University of California at Berkeley, project evaluations have a cost, but it is much costlier to fund ineffective projects over and over again. The development banks rarely develop baseline data so that they can demonstrate the impact of their projects and programs. In contrast, the United States Millennium Challenge account has procured baseline data for some of its projects. Where appropriate, the development banks should establish baseline data and share that data with other donors to avoid unnecessary overlap. See? That's another suggestion. of what they should do. They're just, combing through the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the banks alleviating poverty, and they recommended 50 recommendations to fix that, and made other suggestions to make sure that they're being effective in alleviating poverty. And we don't mind doing that. Whereas these banks that they're talking to and begging to do this don't have any type of motivation at all to alleviate poverty. They prefer people to be poor. The IMS Independent Evaluation Office has been heralded not only for its non-autonomous findings, but because its recommendations are often included in the development of new IMF programs. The IEO was formed after most of the evaluation offices of the other international financial institutions, and some argue that its later development has been an advantage. The African Development Bank is taking steps to evaluate all projects. Currently, less than one quarter of projects were evaluated, according to interviews held in May 2009. The African Development Bank staff has determined that the success of development programs is most highly correlated with: one, the commitment of the borrowing country to fully implement the program, and two, the quality of the project design. African Development Bank staff noted that if a project is designed poorly, it cannot be fixed during implementation, and that it was imperative to get it right at the beginning. You see what I mean? Any normal person realizes that you have to plan. Uh, you see, and the Bible tells us to plan like in this way. You have to plan carefully before something begins implementation, because the implementation is just following the blueprint to get to the result that is projected in the plan. So we're going to make sure we hash out all the details of the plan, and then we're going to be ready to implement the plan once we receive our inheritance. But we're going to have multiple plans. We got a pre-inheritance plan, which is going to be proposed through the proper channels to get enough money to get home. And then once we get home, with our leader already elected, we're going to make a proposal to receive all of our monies, and so that they can bring them to our nation, and we can keep the temple doors open day and night. And they come bring us our family heirlooms and the rest of the treasures. Okay, just wanted to make that part clear. The African Development Bank is committing to posting its project ratings. Officials talked about the need for virtuous circles to be developed so that evaluations lead to accountability, which leads to better projects, which are then evaluated. Need more focus on transparency. Most pressing international issues are spearheaded by specific offices in specific agencies. However, the responsibility for promoting transparency is not delegated to a particular part of the U.S. government. Some argue that all parts of our government are responsible for transparency, but without a clear office responsible for promoting transparency with international organizations and development financing, these issues do not receive the consistent attention that they deserve. The creation, so we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that everything we do is promoted in our media. Okay, so just about every step that we take is going to be published for the public to review. And then we're not going to get comfortable. We're going to have a 1,000-year plan, and we're going to write in the laws that leaders should not get comfortable with being secretive like the satanic world is. Okay, and to publish just about every move that they make so that they can be scrutinized and people can cross-reference it with the Bible because uh, you know that's important. And uh, it's very easy for a leader to become corrupt, especially with the power that we're going to have with all the resources that make every nation on earth look like a drop of a bucket and nothing and less than nothing. Okay. The creation of an ambassador at large for global transparency would allow for the full vetting of transparency issues and press for consistent transparency measures at the international financial institutions and other international organizations with which the United States works. Across the board, the international financial institutions have a tradition of secrecy and opacity that may be typical of certain private sector financial institutions and politically sensitive international organizations. It is not, however, appropriate for public sector institutions that are funded by the taxpayers of democratic countries and that make decisions affecting the lives of millions in the developing world. Steps toward greater transparency that have been undertaken by the development banks in recent years make for better accountability, greater effectiveness, and ultimately stronger public support. But much more needs to be done. The World Bank instituted a new informative disclosure policy, which significantly improves the ability of the institution to disclose information to the public. Nevertheless, it does not allow World Bank board executive directors to release their statements on projects and policies. Disclosure of U.S. executive director votes and statements at the development banks would help enable Americans to understand what policies the United States is promoting at the development banks. See, they hide what they're doing because uh, Americans are dumb. All earthlings are dumb, pretty much, and only the gods understand these things. The wicked gods and the holy gods. We study these things and realize that whenever you're doing stuff like this in secret, you're actually we are not being secretive to the gods. You know what I'm saying? We see what you're doing because we pay attention, whereas dummies don't. So they don't have a clue what's being done to them. Okay. Should a development bank preclude an executive director from releasing his or her statements, a summary of the United States position on the policy or project should be revealed. During the Bush administration, the Treasury Department did begin posting on its website how the U.S. executive directors voted on a project or policy. Okay, so I mean, this is something that your local city council is clear about. The Senate does this. The House of Representatives does this. The state level government does this, and the county level does this. Whatever they vote on, they make it public. They make it known what they're voting on, so that you can see and evaluate and scrutinize what they're doing and be a part of it to influence their decisions. Without your influence, they just go based on their own prejudices, or religion, or lack of religion, or lack of realizing that there's a God, and they can do any number of things. But the majority of intelligent people to get involved with the government would, if they had a biblical mind frame, then the governments around the world would not be so corrupt. But since you fail to engage in their decision makings, then they just come up with any type of decision that suits them and harms you if you have a strong conviction about a particular topic. So that's why you need to get more involved in their decisions, because their decisions affect you. Okay. However, on the current version of the website, it is difficult to locate the voting records. In 2004, Senator Lugar sent then President Kabaj a letter about the African Development Bank's website. Staff discussed the need for an improved African Development Bank website with multiple African Development Bank officials. It is important for the public to know what projects the African Development Bank is funding in each country. All officials agreed but stated that the African Development Bank did not have the staff or the capacity to produce such a website soon. They noted that the World Bank's communications staff was substantially larger than the African Development Bank's communications staff. Coordination could be improved. As the report of the External View Committee on Bank Fund Collaboration asserts, close collaboration is vital because while the bank and the fund have separate mandates, they are inherently linked. For instance, macroeconomic stability, a major fund concern, will not be sustained unless linked to supply side measures and improved quality of public spending. A major bank concern. Similarly, global monetary stability, a fund concern, will have a direct bearing on overall development prospects, which is a bank concern. While the development banks have recently agreed on a shared definition of fraud and corruption and are considering cross debarment, they do not share a policy on investigation. When development banks provide budget support loans to countries, they should work with the IMF and obtain an assessment letter to ensure that the economic policy conditions are appropriate for such a loan. In Argentina and Botswana, the Inter-American Development Bank and African Development Bank, respectively, did not obtain IMF letters prior to lending significant loans to those governments' budgets. Similarly, the IMF should utilize development bank tools such as conflict filters when lending to post-conflict countries. In Sri Lanka, the IMF provided a large loan without utilizing the conflict filter that had been developed by the World Bank for that country. Questions around budget support. Following the global financial crisis, international financial institutions have been increasing their provision of budget support or loans that go directly to the government's budget and are not targeted to a specific project. In May 2009, the IMF announced a new flexible credit line to lend directly to the government's budget rather than solely to a country's central bank. The normal recipient of IMF loans. Okay. Some are concerned that the international financial institutions are lending large amounts as budget support without a corresponding budget management and fiscal transparency framework to ensure that the funds are not misused. For example, the African Development Bank has issued sizable loans that do not appear to be fully coordinated with the other international financial institutions such as the IMF. Usually, it is the IMF that provides short and medium-term support, while the development banks, such as the African Development Bank, provide long-term support. In June 2009, the African Development Bank approved a large $1.5 billion loan for Botswana, an amount more than 13% of the country's GDP. The African Development Bank website noted that Botswana is one of the best managed economies in Africa. The African Development Bank's press release noted the following: the loan falls within the framework of the recently approved strategy by the bank to provide support to member countries affected by the financial crisis and is the largest such facility ever granted by the bank. The budget support loan is designed to fill part of the gap in the government's 2009-2010 budget deficit, currently estimated at 13.5% of GDP, caused by falling commodity prices, particularly diamonds. Okay, now I just want to say something here because this little part of the conversation that they're having here, or the lecture, is sparking me to understand something uh, that makes sense to me. Whenever a person buys a house, right? Say the house is $100,000 house. Okay, somebody gets a loan for $100,000 and has to pay the bank back the $100,000 in payments with $1,000 a month or what, however that goes. Okay, now the bank does not uh, pay off the $100,000 to the person who owns the house. The the bank issues a certain amount to the person who owns the house and retrieves the deed, and transfers the and holds the deed until the house is paid off. Okay, now if this is a effective way to help in alleviating poverty, which is if someone wants to buy your house, okay, you can even treat it as a rent to own right, whereas in a rent to own agreement, 10%, 20% of their rent goes to paying down on the home. However, in the more intelligent way to receive your funds as well as uh, getting funds for getting the homeowner to be motivated to stay in your home is to uh, appropriate 80 to 90% of their rent towards paying down on the property. So that way you're getting 10 to 20% interest on your allowing them to live in the house, and you're getting constant flow of income to your uh, account over time. And also, I was I'm coupling this strategy with say they move out, they lose their job and they can't afford to pay $1,000 a month anymore, and the next person moves in. So this person has paid off. He's lived there for 2 to 3 years. Let's say he lived there for 3 years and paid off 36,000, 33,000 dollars off the $100,000. So that will leave $67,000 left to pay on it. So the next person that moves in should pay uh pay down what is owed on the property, the $67,000, versus repackaging the house and selling the house for $100,000 again to the next buyer. That is extremely intelligent. Also, some people may have the ability to get a loan and pay off the entire amount of $67,000 or the entire amount of $100,000. So there's no way that you can lose uh, utilizing that strategy. Okay. The case of Botswana illustrates the impact that the financial crisis is having on even the best managed economies in Africa. I am delighted that the bank has been able to respond quickly and flexibly in this unique case. Within the bank's framework of response to the financial crisis, said Donald, Kabirika, the president of the bank. The crisis, which is affecting African countries through different channels and increasing demands for support from the international financial institutions, including the bank. This is the first such borrowing from the bank by Botswana in 17 years. Previously, Botswana had in fact several times contributed to the replenishment of the African Development Fund. The soft window of the bank group. Okay. Focus on low-income countries. The international financial institutions, see how they're doing? They focus on low-income countries so that they can continue to borrow from the bank because the borrower is the slave to the lender. So we won't be dealing with any type of loans. We're going to be dealing with strictly grants. Okay. The international financial institutions vary in their focus on serving the poorest countries and the poorest communities in middle-income countries. The World Bank has a formal system to transfer profits from loans to middle-income countries made by International uh, Bank and Reconstruction and Development into a grant and subsidized lending window for low-income countries through the International Development Association. Going forward, it will be important for the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank to increase transfers to their respective grant and subsidized lending windows. The IMF has made significant efforts to address the needs of low-income countries through debt relief and to increase its subsidization of low-income country borrowing. In July 2009, the IMF Executive Board agreed to lower concessional interest rates to zero for at least the next 2 years. One tool that the IMF does not employ is to provide direct grants. Say what? In July 2009, the IMF Executive Board agreed to lower concessional interest rates to zero for at least the next 2 years. One tool that the IMF does not employ is to provide direct grants. While some would argue that IMF is not well suited to provide grant financing, it is something that should be considered when lending to countries with a history of debt relief and dire economic conditions. Okay. So now we read earlier that one of the banks or a number of the banks do have grants. So I'm thinking that that's what it is. The multinational development banks offer grants, but the IMF does not. Okay. So that's why the IMF was not even considered in the proposal that we're going to have here. The banks that we're approaching is the Swiss Bank and the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Okay, so and we're going to be asking for grants to deal with our worldwide membership of our nation. Okay. For example, when the IMF provided Haiti with a $114 million emergency loan in January 2010, Managing Director Dominique Strauss-Kahn stated that if we succeed, and I'm sure we will succeed, see how that's magic that they use. Okay, so words create, and so he wants to be sure that he negates this if here. So you got if we succeed is a doubt, and then you say, and I'm sure we will succeed, which is the will of the power of the word to create. See that? So he negated the doubt with surety. Okay, and Anyone who agrees with that will cause the thing to be created. And anyone who disagrees with what you say uh, will cause the thing to not be created. So you're gonna have to be persuasive so that uh, a majority of people agree with the thing that you want to create, and the minority is uh, the people who disagree with what you want to create, because the disagreement and lack of faith in your word to create causes the thing to be hindered. So if you have one more person than the doubtful people, then your thing that you spoke will be created in reality. Okay, and that's called majority rules, because they agree with what you said, and then so they allow that to move into place. Okay, so the only reason they allow what they consider minorities, who are actually the majority of the earth, but the minorities in each country, to to cause a thing to be created for their benefit, for the benefit of what they consider a minority, is because they realize there's a silent majority who agree with helping the less fortunate. Okay, you see how that works? If you have any questions, you just contact. Even this loan will turn out to be finally a grant, because all the debt will have been deleted. And that's the very important thing for Haiti now. It would appear that in these cases, offering grants would be more efficient and provide more policy clarity. The IMF has been selling gold to fund its new income model, to pay for staff salaries and ongoing operations, as well as to subsidize borrowing for low income countries. It appears that the earnings on the sale of gold are significantly higher than initially expected. The IMF has not determined how to use these excess proceeds. Given the demand by low income countries, it would be helpful if the excess proceeds were directed to a fund for those low income countries to be used for grants, subsidization of loans, and technical assistance. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. So uh, I just want to add here that whenever this fortune is freed up, the value of gold is going to go to pennies. So you have, like, say, for example, right now, gold is probably evaluated at $1,300 an ounce, or something of that nature, right? I don't know the exact numbers because I haven't looked at it in years. But let's say it's like $1,300 an ounce, right? Whenever uh, Solomon's fortune it frees up, they can't arbitrarily uh, determine the price of gold anymore, because gold is going to be so prevalent. So an ounce of gold is going to be worth 10 to 20 cents. So uh, this is another reason why uh, Karen Hudez says that she doesn't believe that gold is a good investment, but she buys gold as an insurance policy, that she will have gold whenever the paper money gets taken out of circulation, because there's going to be a transition between the paper money being taken out of circulation, and the gold coins and gold backed paper money that's going to be issued in its stead. So I just want you to be aware of of that portion of the psychology and the actual numbers that will happen in the future whenever our fortune is freed up. the gold and silver, all those precious commodities are going to be completely worthless, just as they were worthless to the indigenous who owned it all, the Israelites who owned it all around the world. When the conquistadors and things came here to the Americas and they saw all the gold, the Israelites and things of that nature uh, said, "Here you can have, you can have this gold. You just give us 3 cows or something like that, because gold is does not have value. Okay, but it is valuable for the purpose of what all of them were unaware of at that time. So gold and silver and all the other precious metals. You got platinum, which is the best semiconductor metal. So all those metals are valuable for the purpose of power distribution in electric grids. They didn't know that at the time because they didn't have electricity. Okay, so that is the value of the metals to utilize in power systems. Okay, so it's going to have some value, but it's not going to be nearly $1,300 an ounce. It may be 13 cents an ounce, or 35 cents an ounce, or maybe even $1 an ounce at the max. So just letting you know this now, and I'm going to end here. This is Nazida Amy Oz Yasharal, the Crown Prince of Israel. Another inheritance, Israelite inheritance in the books. The most edifying show on in the clouds. So become a part of the conversation, have your voice heard, and claim your portion of this inheritance today. Signing off.